as the war rages in Iran, there are those that argue that this is an assault against the city of London. And there are those that argue, no, it isn't. This is something else entirely. That's what we're going to talk about in this video.
Like, comment, and subscribe. Sign up for my free newsletter and links to the guests in the description below.
Hey, Matt, thank you so much for making yourself available.
Hey, Rich. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, and I'm going to say you look remarkably smart and wonderful. And I think your books are actually real, unlike my books.
Yeah, they're real. You can touch them.
They're real, right? And you've read them all, and we're going to get them all in this conversation. And one thing we're going to talk about Iran, what is going on with Iran from your perspective. Now, one of the things I want to say to people who are watching this, my channel is not an echo chamber. And one of the things that's missing in this world is actual authentic civil debate, people looking at an issue from different angles. And I think there's far too much cancel culture. Though I disagree with you, I'm not going to listen to you, and then we don't get to learn. So, and Charlie Kirk certainly wasn't about cancel culture at all. He would talk to anybody. So here I am. I find myself talking to Matt. Can you believe it? All right. So Matt, I started off by saying that there is a argument that's been made by regular guests on my channel, people I have respect for, like Susan Kokinder and Tom Luongo and Ian Burlingham and Blaine Holt, that what Trump has done by attacking Iran is attacking the city of London. So that's the case, right?
I don't think so. I have noticed a preponderance of those names and some others promulgating that hypothesis. I try to take the approach of when trying to make sense of misinformation, many competing different narratives to try to explain a common occurrence, a common thing. And like you said, there's a lot of disagreement on what is really going on. I try to take an approach of resolving as many paradoxes as possible. And so choosing my hypotheses that resolves as many discontinuities as humanly possible is what I attempt to do. And in my analysis, with my reading, I don't really agree with that set of views. I have not seen any evidence per se that shows me that Iran is the city of London or is NATO, the way some of these voices have been promoting it. And if they prove it to me, like when I go to ask, like, how can you prove that the IRGC is the city of London? I never get any answers beyond simply referring to the British intelligence role in overthrowing the Shah in 1979, as well as MI6, which played a role, the CIA, which played a role in that regime change back 40 plus years ago, 46 years ago. What I'm noticing is that Iran has played instead a much more positive role, especially since 1996, in organizing what's known as the Eurasian Partnership, the multipolar alliance, with it being sort of the central node of two major mega projects that China and Russia, as well as Iran, have formulated together over 25 years. And we could talk about those in detail later.
Well, let me give you the argument, or certainly questions that I have. And just so people know, I was saying to Matt before we started recording, this is what I do as a social worker. I investigate child abuse. I've never, ever seen it happen. Never. What I see are the signs and the red flags and the indicators and what's going on there. And then I asked one parent, and that parent, let's say it's the mum, says, no, he did it, he's doing this and he's doing that. And then I ask the other parent, and the other parent says, no, they're making it all up. I never did that, she's doing it. And I got to work out, pass between the two, what is really, really going on. Like what you said, something has happened, something is happening. And then there's this interpretation and this interpretation and this interpretation and this interpretation, and each one is struggling for dominance. Okay. So these are questions that I have about it, and including stuff that I've been told, because I've recently recorded videos with Colonel Towner Watkins and also with Barbara Boyd, and they're of the view that it is connected to, it is an assault on the city of London. And the reference is that the original Ayatollah Khomeini was connected to European intelligence, possibly French and or MI6, because he was in exile in Paris for 15 years. So that's a bit of a red flag. And he flew in from Paris. Then Barbara Boyce said in the video that I did with her that he was involved in the overthrow of Mossadegh as a young man, Ayatollah Khomeini. And she also said that Britain's pattern, the empire's pattern, is they have this puppet, but they already have the next one lined up. Right now, this isn't concrete proof. It's just a pattern of behavior. Then Savak, the Shah's brutal intelligence agency, spy agency, when the 1979 revolution happened, they killed off the top lieutenants, those in charge of Savak. But essentially, Savak then became the IRGC. And the Savak had long-standing connections with the CIA and MI6. Then there's the questions that I have about Keir Starmer, which I am just puzzled by, Matt. So in the 12-day war last year, the UK was fully involved. They sent planes to bomb Yemen. They were providing intelligence to the Israelis, and as well as technical support so that Israelis could kill Palestinians in large numbers. And then every Anglo-American misadventure in the Middle East, in my adult life, the British have been there right at the front, next to the Americans. Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, the bombing of Yemen last year, the support that they've given to Israel over the years. And then Keir Starmer, half his cabinet are Labour Friends of Israel. And there's a great thread by a British journalist called Jodie McIntyre. Jodie, please contact me via X and send me a DM and come on my channel. We can talk about things British. So he did this great thread where he points out all the connections that Starmer and certain leading figures in his government, in the Labour government, have with Zionists, have with Israel. Starmer apparently is Jewish, his wife is Jewish. Okay, being Jewish doesn't mean you're Zionist, but he has a lot of connections to Zionism and Zionist entities and a lot of money from that direction, as do many of his leading figures like Morgan McSweeney and then Peter Mandelson, a leading figure in the entire Labour movement in Britain, from behind the shadows, working closely with Tony Blair. And there is a suspicion that it's really Tony Blair who's pulling Starmer's strings. So the fact that Starmer said to Trump, you can't use Diego Garcia this time, and we're not going to get involved in any offensive capacity. Not that I want Britain to, but that's a little bit suspect. Why aren't they gung-ho about it? Why aren't they in there attacking? Oh, and there's a bit more.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then there's John Bolton. John Bolton's worried about a deepening conflict. John Bolton's become a lentil-eating hippie, I suspect. Why isn't he in there saying? Because Iran is, from the Zionist perspective, from the Israeli perspective, the biggest, baddest enemy of Israel. So why not join in? And then why not join in with the US so you can get a share of the oil spoils? Because Britain had benefited a lot from the oil in Iran. So this doesn't make sense because Starmer's not a peacenik. He's got no worries about supporting Slav to kill Slav.
Yeah.
So square all those circles for me, Matt, and tell me the truth.
Yeah, well, I don't know about. I'll tell you the analysis that I have, and I'll try to square as much as I can, or shave off some of the edges as much as I can to some of the squares. All right. So the thing about the British Empire is that they are in Iran. They were always known as the fox, right? You just don't trust the fox, and the British Empire, has well earned this moniker because they never exerted their power or they haven't for a very long time through direct military enforcement. In today's UK is the Commonwealth is very weak militarily speaking. It's true they've got some strategic holdings, but overall, I think that they would rather maintain the image. the image of being peaceful, if they don't need to put on the war mask, they would prefer to have the branding of the rational actor, which is actually directing war from behind the scenes. And in fact, Kit Clarenberg, a writer for the Gray Zone, recently sent me a fantastic new essay that he published on his Substack, going through MI6's role in promoting and spreading the lie that Iran has this secret nuclear weapons program going back to the early 2000s, really the moment Dick Cheney failed to get his first strike on Iran back in 2007 in December, when all of the war drums were blaring. That's actually what got me political originally. Was I joined, ironically, the LaRouche organization with a small office in Montreal. I've talked to you about this, and it was in the midst of the shock and awe period, the new crusade of enmeshment into these forever wars in the Middle East out of 9/11. That 9/11 made all of this possible, which are based on lies of weapons of mass destruction that came largely from 10 Downing Street, the 10 Downing Street memo that was released, in the Chilcot inquiries that proved that British intelligence was behind making up fake information that was sold to an American and broader Western population that Iraq was actually had this secret WMD program. And similarly, in Kit Clarenberg's essay, he points out to the figure of Iran specialist MI6 operative Nicholas Langman, whose CV had circulated, had been leaked, where he had been bragging of his role directing the flow of information into U.S. intelligence, as well as media, as well as the IAEA itself, that Iran has this secret nuclear weapons program from 2007. Now, I was organized and I went down and lobbied with the LaRouche activists back in those days, with people like Barbara Boyd and others in Congress, to bring attention to the fact that we have to stop this war in Iran from happening. It's based on lies. There's no evidence whatsoever. And luckily, there were some patriots still within the CIA, who declassified when Dick Cheney was in hospital for like a week getting heart surgery. They took that opportunity to declassify and leak this national intelligence estimate in 2007 that revealed that the U.S., that Cheney and company, Wolfowitz and others, Richard Pearl, had been lying about about the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And in fact, U.S. intelligence concluded that at least since 2003, when the fatwa had been placed officially by Khamenei against the development of WMDs and nuclear weapons, that indeed there was no evidence that it had been restarted or that there was any such thing. So it was based on lies, and these revelations took the wind out of the sails of war, and it bought the world a lot of time. It bought Iran some time as well, and that was good. Because what was Iran doing? And this is where, again, this guy, Nicholas Lang, you might want to talk to Kit Clarenberg. I really think he'd make a good conversation partner on some of this.
I've had him as a guest on my old channel a long time.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and
sweet.
It was actually to promote notaxforwar.com. I invited him. And that, by the way, notaxforwar.com, for people in Britain, if you want to, you can find out how you can use trust law very simply and freely to legally, lawfully, peacefully withhold your taxes as a protest against the policies of the Keir Starmer government. Notaxforwar.com. Sorry.
No, that's good. Absolutely. I think that I'm so glad that you guys have already started a conversation, and yeah, our tax money should be going towards. I mean, I was listening to your chat with Barbara Boyd the other day, and she did make the point that there is such a thing as just wars, and anybody who reads St. Augustine can get an introduction into the theory of just versus unjust wars. And I do agree with that. But to say that this war has been a just war, I don't think St. Augustine would agree to that, considering it was a preemptive strike that began with killing 170 children in a school, the Majid school in Iran. As almost the first initiating act of this war, civilian infrastructure, water desalination centers in Iran have been struck. Energy deposits have been struck, like one of the biggest oil what do you call it? Repository has been blown up in Iran. These are things that are directly going to kill lots of Iranian civilians. There's already about 2,000 Iranian civilians who have been killed. Hezbollah, not Hezbollah, sorry, Lebanon has been invaded by Iran. I think last count was about 470 casualties, civilian casualties in Lebanon have already begun, and they haven't even launched the major promised bombing campaign of Lebanon. That's been promised. Again, the British, I think, have been, or British intelligence, which is different from the British government, as you and I have talked about. And Fabians, as Keir Starmer and Tony Blair are very good at using this Jesuitical, chameleon-like, slippery quality in their language. You can never really peg them down. And I think that a lot of the words that you hear coming from a play actor like a Starmer is just that. They're just words as part of a broader bit of kabuki theater. It's all about the effect that matters. And the effect has been, as for many, many years, I would say, and I'm going to go through a little bit of this recent history, since especially the mid-90s, since the murder of Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister of Israel in 1995 in November, the arch priority of these neocons that were already preparing to take power, the followers of Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Straussians, around Richard Perle and Wolfowitz and Cheney, these guys were already producing policy documents for the new prime minister of Israel, who got power over Yitzhak Rabin's dead corpse, Benjamin Netanyahu, in 1996. When and in their policy documents, they all call for destroying Iran. Like, a regime change of Iran is the top priority, but why? And this, for example, the first policy document I'm thinking about is the Clean Break Doctrine, a strategy for securing the realm, overseen by Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Kagan, the brother-in-law of Victoria Nuland. They were the authors of this thing for Benjamin Netanyahu to secure the realm, calling for essentially a new strategic outlook that lets go of the foolishness of the Oslo two-state solution protocols that Yitzhak and Yasser Arafat had been attempting to do with great success from 92 until 95. That was like the primary arch policy orientation of Israel under Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser, was to say, okay, the 1947 proclamation at the UN that acknowledged the state of Israel, or that created the state of Israel out of British Mandate Palestine, also will create in 1947 a state of Palestine too. That was called and the idea was these two states would be created, and economic development would allow for some form of mutual trust building over the ensuing generations. That is not what happened. Half of the proclamation was honored. Israel was created. The other half was ignored. Palestine was never granted a seat at the UN or anything like that. So they're kind of like floating as a pseudo country, right? And instead, it took a long time, but finally Yitzhak said, okay, I realize my former way of thinking was wrong, that I had to change my axioms and make peace with my enemies, and he was. So anyway, they do that. But he also requested, because he knew that for that to work required economic development, and he requested that U.S. funds and World Bank funds that were going to the Middle East be directed towards infrastructure, because he knew that this is transgenerational pain and eye for an eye revanchism that's caused a big problem. So we have to start building things together, Palestinian and Israeli alike, to have water for the Middle East, to have hospitals, to build for our kids' futures, and that can begin the healing. Unfortunately, the World Bank had an emergency meeting. Forces at the Federal Reserve and others were joining that, and they all said, no, we're not going to grant you that authorization. The money has to go for structural readjustment, debt payments, and nothing else is permitted. So that took a lot of the wind out of the sails of peace. And when Yitzhak was finally killed, not by an Iranian, not by a Muslim fundamentalist even, he was killed by a Zionist, a radical Zionist who was deployed to murder him, tied to Ben Gvir, who's currently a major player in the current Israeli government. That's when Netanyahu came in. And the new strategy for securing the realm, the Clean Break Doctrine, said, okay, the new U.S.-Israeli alliance has to focus on regime change in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and Iran. That has to be the big focus. And they call for it. Cynthia, my wife, wrote a deep dive analysis of this strategy, which they begin to do. and Wesley Clark, the former head of NATO, had given his famous revelatory speeches as well in 2004 and 2005, describing this new policy that was given to him by the new incoming neocons. But why did they do this? So why did they want Iran as such a target from that moment forward? Requires just quickly first showcasing an image, which I'm going to do right now by going to an article that I recently published. And this article, I made a little, I got AI to make a little, or Cynthia actually got AI to make a little image of Dick Cheney with a MAGA hat called How MAGA Influencers Are Morphing into Neocons. I thought that was kind of a sick, funny image, so I went with that. But then what happened? Because at the time, you had this fellow by the name of President Hashemi Rafsanjani and Mohammad Khatami. That right there is President Mohammad Khatami, the president from 1997 to 2005, meeting with Pope John Paul II. And he began a policy for Iran to break away from the former, more radical fundamentalist, regressive program of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And the new policy in the early 90s, begun by Rafsanjani and then continued by him and promoted by Ayatollah Khomeini, the second Grand Ayatollah, was a dialogue of civilizations, a looking outward towards looking for what's best in everybody's cultural histories and traditions and trying to make that the foundation of intercultural dialogue. So he was invited to go to Rome in 97 and again in 1999. He gave a speech after meeting with the Pope at the University of Florence, saying to delve into the past history without looking at the future can only be an academic diversion. To help human societies and improve the condition of the world, it is necessary to consider the present state of relations between Asian, in particularly Muslim countries, and Europe. Why do we say in particularly Muslim? Because Islam is Europe's next door neighbor. Unlike individuals, nations are not free to choose or change neighbors. Therefore, apart from moral, cultural, and human reasons, out of historical and geographical necessity, Islam and Europe have no choice but to gain a better and more accurate understanding of each other and thus proceed to improve their political, economic, and cultural relations. Our future cannot be separated from each other because it is impossible to separate our past, citing the great Renaissance traditions that united them both. So at the same time as he's doing this, calling for a dialogue of civilizations as the foundation of international dialogue, you have Zbigniew Brzezinski, sort of the grand master of this neocon takeover of the U.S. government, publishing his Grand Chessboard same year, 1997, saying potentially the most dangerous scenario that is of the imminent New World Order, the end of history that he was celebrating as his life's mission, as he says, would be a grand coalition of China, Russia, and perhaps Iran, an anti-hegemonic coalition united not by ideology, but by complementary grievances. So he publishes this because the new ideology that Khatami understands is coming on is this Hobbesian clash of civilizations doctrine, which is going to result in World War III. So he's consciously trying to push back against that. And then Brzezinski continues to say how the United States both manipulates and accommodates the principal geostrategic players on the Eurasian chessboard and how it manages Eurasia's key geopolitical pivots will be critical to the longevity and stability of America's global primacy. So from there, you have Netanyahu, begins in a big way his constant script of Iran's 3 weeks away from a nuclear bomb. That becomes something that is deafening. But Iran is going to Russia. They're meeting up with Putin, not Putin. Actually, Putin is coming into power in 1999. But you have Yevgeny Primakov, one of Putin's key patrons in Russia, who's organizing what's known as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with China, with India, that Iran is invited into. They become a full member. It takes them 20 years, but they become a full member of this Russia-China-led Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India and Pakistan become members in 2019. But you have also the beginning of what's known in the year 2001 of the International North-South Transportation Corridor. With India, Iran, and Russia signed together, they get 11 other nations who will benefit by this strategic corridor from the north of Russia. It actually extends even further north than what you see there, through Iran, which is the key node, into India, with ports like the Chabahar, the Bushehr ports in the south of Iran. And it's about 9,000 kilometers of multimodal ports as a peace corridor of win-win cooperation, massive industrial development. And unfortunately, 9/11 and the wars in the Middle East block this from happening, but it finally gets revived in 2019, and it becomes then the dominant thing shaping for a positive way peace in the Middle East. And again, as you could see there, Iran plays a key role in that dynamic. And then also the new Silk Road that China unleashes in 2019 moves in a deep way the middle corridor, as you can see there. It has a sea-based component, but also a land-based blue component that moves through Iran as an east-west corridor. That also has extensions down into Africa in a variety of ways. It does represent something premised on looking for avoiding war, creating new prosperity, new cities, new development corridors. And these are all things that Iran is playing a direct role in. Iran also becomes a full member of the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa alliance. I'm going to stop the share for now. In 2004, along with 9 other, so they raised the total number with Indonesia to 10 full members, many other partial members. And overall, Iran is just simply dealing with being the most sanctioned country in the world, behind Venezuela, the 2 countries that rejected Rothschild City of London central banks in those countries, because everybody else, we got them, almost every country except for China, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, has privatized central banks installed in their countries as almost independent entities outside of the authorization of the sovereign nation state, controlling and keeping everybody in financial slavery. Iran has rejected the pressure to impose a privatized central bank, as did Venezuela, though that might change there. They have been the most sanctioned.
Syria didn't have a Rothschild-controlled central bank, and neither did Libya. I'm not sure about Iraq. Probably not, I suspect. Don't know, but let us know in the comments. Did Iraq have a Rothschild-controlled central bank before the Gulf War and the Second Iraq War? China doesn't, Russia doesn't, North Korea doesn't. And what that does for people who don't know, essentially it allows a privately owned central bank can then profit from the taxes through lending interest to the government, lending money to the government at interest.
Yeah.
Nice gig if you can get it.
Yeah. So if the City of London had such a big control over Iran as some say, then why don't they have the City of London directed central bank? Why have they been punished with pulling sanctions for over 40 years? Why is that the case? Why are they being so consciously destroyed economically? Many people who don't pay attention to the international dynamics and look only at the localized regions, they think that Iran or Venezuela is to blame for the bad economy, and they ignore the fact that there have been, dishonest game masters destroying and isolating them from anybody that they would otherwise be able to do business with. Same thing for Cuba, right? Is the shit economy in Cuba the fault specifically of the Cuban government, or is it that we've been destroying them with international sanctions, hurting other nations that want to do business with them? I would say a lot of that has to do with the sanctions. So there's that. There's the other thing when I ask, like, well, how do we prove that Iran in any way is NATO? The thing that I see as being NATO which is what some of these analysts that you've pointed out have also said. They're the City of London. It is NATO. That is what Trump is attacking in the Middle East. The thing that I'm seeing is actually the power of NATO has more to do with what Israel represents and much more to do with what India currently is signing up for with Israel in building up, what's known as the IJ? Oh, I had it in my memory banks, and the I2U2 program of India, Israel, a security sort of doctrine or umbrella that would invite in friendly Arab Gulf states, some friendly African states into this new security complex. That seems to be more like the Middle East Quad, which Modi, in his speech in Israel at the Knesset, the day before the bombs began falling onto Iran, was saying needs to be the new future for India-Israel relations, along with the India-Israel, what's called the India Middle East Economic Corridor, which was sold by first Joe Biden in 2023 and Modi, as an alternative to the BRI, the Chinese-led BRI project. And anybody can Google that and look at like what this is, but it's basically from Mumbai in India through Saudi Arabia, Israel, into Europe, a massive economic corridor that would render the Chinese-led corridors obsolete, especially if Iran is lit on fire. And that is what Modi has made his top priority. That is also what was discussed when he met with Trump on day 2, or I think March 2nd or March 3rd. And a deal was made between the U.S. and Iran for the U.S. and India for India to stop buying Russian gas, which they've been doing in abundance since the special military operation, which has pissed off many strategic game masters in the West. And so Modi promised, I don't think he's going to do it yet, but still he promised, according to Trump, that he'll stop buying Russian oil and instead buy U.S. controlled oil from either the U.S. or from Venezuela increasingly as a way to create a demand where currently it's tough because enriching and or refining Venezuelan oil is very costly, very expensive. So you need to create more demand in order to justify that growth and the building up of the Venezuelan oil economy. So that's something apparently Modi agreed to. He had similar meetings with Carney, describing a special India-Canada special partnership as well. So it seems like India is being pulled out of the BRICS, out of these multipolar dynamics that Russia, Iran, and China have been building up for decades, and being pulled into a new game, which I think is a very dangerous one, especially considering the fact that India has their own weird version of Solomon's Temple in the form of this massive Ram temple devoted to Ram that was installed and built right atop one of the most sacred sites in India, which had formerly been built up during the Mughal Empire like 550 years ago. And they basically tore down this mosque in 92, the same year that India built or created their first diplomatic recognition of Israel and opened up diplomatic ties with Israel the same year. And that was the same site, the sacred site that resulted in mostly like 2,000 civilians, mostly Muslim, getting killed in riots by these Hindu nationalists, which was then selected to be the site that a Hindu temple to Ram would be built upon that was inaugurated in 2024. Clear recipe book for intergenerational hostilities. Similar type of problem that we get to the Third Temple logic that somehow has to be right there on Al-Aqsa Mosque. Like it has to be right there, so you have to blow up the sacred Muslim site in order to install your third temple. It's like no,
the third holiest site for Muslims after Mecca. Yeah.
Like why not beside it? Why does it have to be right there on top of it? It's like you could. So it seems like there is a recipe book for thinking about the next several centuries of hostilities that does seem to involve this weird Hindu Zionist connection that I'm only beginning to wrap my mind around now, but it's definitely fulfilling a bad eschatology. But Iran is not to blame. I'm not seeing any evidence that Iran has been playing this nefarious role of wanting to hate and destroy the patriots in America or anything. I just can't. If the evidence could be presented to me, I would take it in, but I just haven't seen anything beyond references to things that happened in 1979 and ignore all of the evidence of changes in character and policy that I've seen coming out of Iran, especially since the 90s.
Well, one of the things to consider, Matt, is the United States and the UK have never, ever lied to go into a war.
That's true. I forgot about that one. That's a big deal.
Never, ever. It's always with no propaganda there, no justification, right? So we can relax with that knowledge. This is irony, by the way, for those watching, just in case you missed it. Some people take me far too seriously. Okay.
No, irony is lost on a lot of people. I did an article back in 2020 when Biden came back into power, and there are these psychiatrists brought into CNN and also in the mainstream media to help give advice to families around America who had family members who still were brainwashed into believing that the elections were stolen and how these are effectively potentially new domestic terrorists that we have to think about how do we speak to them. And I wrote an article, a satire called "Confessions of a Debrainwashed Trump Supporter." And it was a total satire. Like, I was over the top on it, and I had so many people writing to me saying, "Oh, you, Matthew? Well, are you insane? Why aren't you weren't brainwashed?" So I mean, it was sad to see how irony was
Yes,
was just lost.
yes. Okay, well, here's
Yeah.
another argument,
Mm,
which I don't know too well, and you might, because you and I did a video, I think it was you and me, about the Muslim Brotherhood and the rise.
mhm.
Yes, it was you and me, the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, and
Yeah.
then how it's operated like the Fabian Society has done in Britain, sort of infiltrated and penetrated positions in government and executive and politicians, and kind of molded them and shaped them with its own perspective. So they're pushing a particular agenda. But that the Ayatollah's regime and also Erdogan's regime, Turkey, came out of the Muslim Brotherhood. That the British destroyed, the British and French defeated the Ottoman Empire, put Kemal Ataturk in power as a secular counterfoil and as their proxy. And one of the things he did was he got rid of the Arabic script, so people weren't able to reference their Ottoman heritage and know their history. And that the Muslim Brotherhood, which kind of explains. By the way, Matt, I have to say something. Your grasp of detail. You may have noticed I don't have that. I'm really good at the broad sweeps, right? The larger patterns, okay? We complement each other. You can fill in the details, right? But the
Yeah,
idea.
yeah, I'll do trees, you do forest, and it'll be a nice picture.
That's right. So the that Erdogan, that Turkey its polity has been shaped by the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that the Iranian regime has been shaped by the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's been infiltrated by Muslim Brotherhood people. And then also something else, that the Iranian government or the Iranian regime isn't one homogenous body, but there's the religious governing councils, the Ayatollahs and all those clerics that say, listen, we've got to keep it all good and Islamic. And then there's the IRGC. So while the Ayatollah may issue a fatwa to forbid the development of nuclear weaponry, well, the IRGC, as the descendants of Savak, like spy agencies everywhere, they may have their own agenda.
Oh yeah, that's true. And I'd like to get somebody like I like rigor, you know. There are factions in every
Rigor?
country.
I can
Yeah.
feel it. I can feel it, Matt.
No, and I'm sure you're correct as far as I like mapping out the deep state as much as is knowable about the deep state structures in various countries to get an appreciation like where are the legitimate representatives of the interests of these civilizations and nations versus the traitors who are directed by something on high but yet kind of smelling like sulfur, this shadow government thing. Um as far as what I could tell, like I was mentioning through my research, and Muriel Wiesbach is somebody who has been. She was writing a lot. Actually, she was writing for EIR, as many of the best analysts have been. We've noticed have been typically associated at various times with EIR. But she was doing a lot of work in the 90s, early 2000s, and some of her deep dives into the Iranian governance structures and changes in paradigm that I was outlining, that Cynthia outlined in her works, was very useful. It does seem like a big purge of the swamp occurred in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
That was a major fight in Iran that involved a lot of soul searching, a lot of self-examination of like, well, what does Iran want to be? There were certain legitimate grievances that gave rise to the revolution, but it was also tied to, as you pointed out, very occult French Sorbonne, British intelligence directed and influenced operatives tied to the first Grand Ayatollah, and good people got pulled into that thing, ended up becoming instruments for something that they didn't fully understand. There were good things that happened that were like the nationalization of British oil interests in the Middle East, but then nothing. The type of economic mobilization needed to direct the control of these formerly private, foreign agencies was never permitted. Iran was sanctioned like crazy. The massive sanctions, the U.S. basically immediately stole. They froze Iran's foreign reserves. I think, I don't know, $6-7 billion worth, a lot back in those days. As the first step of a massive sanction regime, they were trying to already provoke. I mean, there were cases where Iranian civilian planes were shot down by forces tied to the West. And we never apologized. The United States never apologized for actually shooting down a civilian airline, but we just sanctioned them even more. So you definitely have something that was tied to the Muslim Brotherhood that made the sort of anarchist, anti-woman, regressive revolution possible in the early or late 70s. That's true. We do know that certain forces tied to the Savak, some of them were punished. Some of them were given sanctuary in the West, in the United States, in the Commonwealth, and became sort of part of this international Iranian deep state international. Some of them put on new masks and readapted to the new reality of becoming part of the Islamic Republic's intelligence services. Maybe some of them were genuine, maybe some of them weren't, but we know that there was a fight and a purging throughout the 1990s, whereby this new characteristic of Iran that had a very set new security doctrine and identity that would be much more progressive emerged out of that fire. So I would like to see someone who's done some good work mapping that out. I've only begun to start mapping it out, so I'm not an authority. I can't really speak in great detail, but what I can speak to is the fact that it seems like the people who have wanted Iran to be bombed have been the greater Israel fanatics who have been obsessed with rebuilding Solomon's temple on behalf of this broader eschatological high priesthood that wants to bring back global feudalism by resetting civilization in our cultures during some controlled demolition of the world economy. That's something I can identify. It seems like Iran's been doing pretty constructive policies that have been breaking themselves and others out of that trajectory by working with the multipolar alliance. That's something I can map, I can measure, I can look at who's been trying to subvert it. I could look to see how these people who killed Yitzhak Rabin were also the ones who did 9/11. I know that there's a connection there, and I don't think Iran has anything to do with 9/11 or but it seems to be connected to that. Which and then I could also see that the thing that groomed Hezbollah as sort of an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, which it was in the 87, those who gave it the biggest support were people like Netanyahu and Israeli intelligence and Shin Bet, which have been on record. I actually have a quote here from Netanyahu saying in 2019, anybody who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. He gave this as an interview. 2019, you have Charles Freeman, the former U.S. diplomat and ambassador to Saudi Arabia, said Israel started Hamas. It was a project of the Shin Bet from the beginning. I've got 2 pages of quotes of Israeli intelligence agents who have retired, all describing how important it was to keep Hamas in power as the official voice of the people of the Gazan government, because it created a more predictable, religiously fanatic-oriented identity that could then give an excuse to Israel to go and preventatively strike and then cleanse Gaza, so that a greater Israel policy could be brought into play. Gaza has some of the biggest oil reserves in the world, over 1 billion barrels of oil off of the coast of Gaza that's not been permitted to be developed. Yasser Arafat had tried to develop it for the benefit of the people of Palestine and Israel back in 2003, but he was killed in 2004. Apparently, it was polonium poisoning when his body was dug up and tests were done on his bones. Apparently, they were contaminated with they had radiation poisoning. So apparently, he was killed, just like Yitzhak was killed. But that is something that I think it has been on the minds of many of the Zionists, including those in the United States, who have wanted to take control of the Gaza, because those oil fields are massive, and that will define the coming century or more of oil geopolitics, especially if China can be cut off of their supplies. And they have a lot of supplies. They don't just get their oil and natural gas from Russia. They get a lot of it from the Middle East. And if that could be lit on fire, not only is the Belt and Road Initiative going to be destroyed and the International North-South Transportation Corridor going to be destroyed, but also China's energy security will be highly handicapped. They only have about 100 days of reserves. So they've already stopped all exports of their oil. And I think that that's a high priority for the planners right now around Pete Hegseth, is to cripple China in any way possible so that they could later on be struck and weakened as they are seen as the dominant threat to U.S. hegemony.
Bloody hell. Geopolitics is so complicated.
It's messy, eh? It's a gross game.
But, it's a little bit like, I suppose, an extended family politics as well. This uncle not happy with that uncle, and these cousins are falling out with these cousins, and this sister-in-law doesn't talk to that sister-in-law. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I don't even want to get into why you think it's doing it. Not yet. We're going to come to that.
Okay.
We haven't addressed Britain's role. Why isn't the City of London, Britain, going in there, gung-ho, cashing in on it, side by side with Trump as a way to reconcile? Let's get BP back in Iran, get the oil flowing, or get the revenue flowing again into Britain. Why? Why are they holding back on this assault against a Muslim nation? The biggest, baddest one of all.
Yeah, I think the part of this Venetian technique that I've looked at throughout history, I don't think Britain was all that gung-ho as far as their official policy towards the Vietnam War either. They wanted to get
they
nations they wanted.
But that's because the Prime Minister at the time, Harold Wilson, actually had some brains about him and some integrity. I don't think that can be said.
A little bit.
Well, yeah. Certainly more than Starmer. I don't think that can be said about Starmer.
No, yeah. Well, I do think that
handler Blair.
Yeah, I do think that in general, and keep in mind Blair. That's the thing, right? They do seem to be using kind of this World Wrestling Federation technique that was baked into the style of kayfabe that grew out of the World Wrestling Federation, genre of having personalities who play a certain role. Sometimes they're good. They could be next week a bad guy. They could flip. Little dramas are built up. People kind of know they're watching a lie, but they kind of want to believe it's true. So it kind of blurs the idea of reality and fantasy. And I think that some of those tactics that were developed over the last 40 years, since the WWF and WWE became things, have been increasingly applied in a weird way to the political wrestling matches. So some of the stuff, like I said, I do tend to look at it increasingly, much of it, not all, but like kabuki theater, with games within games and personalities. What they say one day, they can be given a new script next week, and there's that. I think also the British Empire, like the Venetian Empire before them, are really good at getting other people to go into wars, acting like they will do it too. And then when the time comes, they tend to take a step back and say, "Oh, I got this other thing I got to deal with first. Oh, you guys just jump into that burning house. We'll come back and join you later. We promise." They're not going to do that. It's like the euro, the entire European Union and the euro system itself. A lot of the policy documents, the propaganda that went into getting everybody to get rid of their sovereignty in Europe and jump into this like common market or this euro system. A lot of that came from the City of London, and Britain was promising to be a part of it in the early 90s, in 91, 92, and then convenient crisis happens. Soros gambles against the pound. And then they were able to say, well, look, we got to deal with our mess here. Our economy's in shambles. You guys just go ahead with the plan. We'll come into the cage later. No, they just closed the cage and locked it, right? And Soros he was rewarded. He played a very, very useful role for his masters. Evelyn de Rothschild was the major bankroller of quantum management, the first, major hedge fund that Soros created in the 60s. That was Evelyn de Rothschild. He's always been a British asset, but then he could be sold in this World Wrestling Federation game to the credulous as being an enemy of the British Empire because he gambled and hurt them, at a specific time. And so you got these, again, personas. So that's how I'm kind of reserving judgment in a certain way. I just know that that's the character of the beast. And maybe they
No.
could what?
Yes and no. Like I said,
Mm.
Starmer had no hesitation in supporting Israel to kill Palestinians. And they're not a threat the way the Iranians are. He had no hesitation in joining in with the US sorties against Yemen.
Okay.
The Houthis.
You,
Houthis last
well, you
year.
want to hear what though? Like Britain wants to try to create a very positive relationship with China. That's a high priority. So Starmer went and met with Xi Jinping. He's trying
A
to
special deal about whiskey. It's like
Yeah.
worth peanuts.
Did they really?
Yeah. He also came back with what was it? He came back with hardly anything worthwhile, right? China's
Yeah.
That's the deal about no tariffs on British Scottish whiskey imported into China. Great.
China's not stupid, and I think
No.
they know that these efforts by the British to seduce them into new deals, because the U.S. is so loco, they're so vile, and that we got to work together, us people who want to have peace and win-win cooperation. So they know this charm offensive China knows is disgenuine. They know that HSBC still is the international drug bank that runs the Hong Kong economy still to this very day. It's on the enemies list of China.
So Matt, China's still a bit wary of that drug dealer.
Yeah, they still don't want to let that drug dealer babysit their kids.
Yeah.
Drug dealer's like, hey, I know what I did and I know what I do, but I'm good now. Well, let me babysit your kids. Like, no.
I've been to NA meetings. I no longer push opium on the masses.
Yeah, right. So I think part of it though is, what would that do? Because they want to loosen up the China-Russia relationship a lot. They're using Canada as well to try to impose a charm. So they're sending Carney out as an emissary of London to try to use Canada's resources to say to China, hey, look, we're a new Canada. Let's work together because we're both being bullied by the big baddie United States. Let's start doing some comprehensive trade deals. And China's also been keeping Canada on a bit of in the penalty box a little bit. They're signing some superficial things, but they're not doing the things that are being requested. But the desire is there. It's desperate because China and Russia have to be loosened up. They have to be weakened. And the British have to get into a more a deeper position of influence within the institutions that China is currently controlling, like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and other things that they want to. They want to have a seat at those tables to infiltrate them like a Trojan horse that they are. So I think that part of it is lipstick. It's that they know that if they took part, China is absolutely against, Russia is absolutely against what's going on in Iran. They see it as a direct threat to their existence, this bombing of Iran. That would alienate and destroy their efforts if they made it too well known that they were actually supportive of the strikes on Iran that could spill over easily, even becoming maybe even a nuclear war, where we know that Israel does have a Samson doctrine when they feel existentially threatened. They do allow they have given themselves the authorization to launch their nuclear warheads at everybody around them, including their allies. All of this stuff is makes the Chinese very angry, makes the Russians very angry. So I think that Starmer might just be used right now to put out a certain image for the time being. I'd be curious to see what they do in the if they can be maintained. I don't know.
That makes sense. That could explain it. Then the other thing is that Trump is doing this deliberately in order to further the Great Reset. Because what it's going to lead to is greater poverty and destruction in the Middle East and Europe and Britain. No energy, mass migration again from the Middle East into Europe, the evisceration of the middle classes again, further accelerating that process, because without energy, how are you going to support a modern economy? So that the Europeans and the Britons will get to owning nothing and eating bugs even quicker.
Yeah, I mean, it's energy is the key. The correlation between energy systems and human population, what we can support at any given time, are directly connected. And the British Empire knows this. All imperialists have known this for a long time. So if you can, the British Foreign Ministry just recently, a day before the bombing of Iran, they released an emergency announcement warning that their intelligence was leading them to believe that there was a plan to bomb the Turk Stream and Blue Stream pipelines that move Russian gas into Turkey and then into Europe. That would be a British Kiev dual operation. They didn't mention the United States, but probably would be involved. If that does happen still, I don't know, but it would be desperate. You just see Kuwait is announcing a cancellation of their export contracts. We have Qatar as one of the major suppliers of Europe's natural gas that have canceled all of their export contracts. Iraq also is severely curtailing their own oil exports, as is Kuwait. I said Kuwait. Aramco has suffered one of the biggest destructions of one of their biggest refineries, which appears to actually be less Iranian according to certain sources and more Israeli as far as a false flag might be concerned. So we could see how Nord Stream 1 and 2 were destroyed. Seymour Hersh demonstrated the role of the United States intelligence and certain other intelligence agencies in destroying Nord Stream 1 and 2, but especially 2.
Yeah.
So there's very little left. I mean, what you have then, just a pipeline going through Ukraine from Russia into Europe that can be shut off at a moment's notice. There's not much left. So it does seem like a severe scarcity plan has been put into place. The Straits of Hormuz, nobody wants to go through there right now. It's too volatile. So what, 23% of the world's energy goes through?
Yeah, it's going to have that outcome. Okay. Then one thing to acknowledge is just the fog of war. Truth is the first casualty of war. And nowadays, with so much information available, there's so many different ideas. You know, like the school, I've heard, oh, it was an Iranian missile that misfired. I've heard, oh, it was the Israelis. No, it was the Americans. Who the hell knows, especially with AI, right? So it's just something to acknowledge. Then the question is, and I'm not saying it didn't happen, by the way, and it wasn't tragic, right? NoTaxForWar.com. But why then? Why did this anti-war president didn't start any new wars in his first term? Has done kinetic action, but it's always been short-lived. Short-lived, small-scale kinetic action. Why did he do this, go up against Iran?
I think that we might have to tackle a deeper question about what is eschatology, and how do these millennialist concepts that sound insane become policy, and how have they been policy, shaping things like the Balfour Accords, the 1947 program to create the state of Israel, the Nazi British collusion to do the Havara agreements, the transfer agreements that made Israel possible in 1933. Why did a bunch of Nazis who despised the Jews work so hard to create a state of Israel with the British, who were overseen by a bunch of pro-Nazi bankers and fascists like Lord Milner, who hated the Jews, yet devoted so much effort to creating a homeland, a safe space for the diaspora of the Jews of the world to go and live in the desert? Like, it seems like a paradox.
I know, sure. I know why, because they hate the Jews. They see them as dispensable, and they're going to use them to shit stir this group of guys that they have no regard for. They're going to deposit them there so they can shit stir with this other group of guys that are already living there. They don't care.
Yeah, kind of. And they also have an idea. So correct, you get a star. And I would say additionally, and again, we could talk about this. This almost deserves a whole show unto itself. Maybe at some point we'll do that. Is an intention to recreate the Templar state known as the Kingdom of Jerusalem that existed for about 2 centuries, from the First to the Fifth Crusades, in that very same area that we see today on the map that's been on fire. There has been an agenda to do that, with an idea of Solomon's Temple, which certain secret societies, like the Templars were, and like the Knights of Malta currently are, as a chivalric, esoteric, initiatory mystery school masquerading as a Christian mercenary group, which has today's Pope Leo XIV as a member, a Knight of the Order of Malta, as well as apparently Carney as well. And Alan Dulles and all the leading Nazis of the SS were all orders of Malta. which was created 1,000 years ago with Templars to oversee this ritual, sacred murder campaign of blood, purgative violence called the Crusades, around which the Solomon Temple idea was very important, which is why the Templars had made Solomon's Mines the location that some have said is what is right next to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and why we need to blow up Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was known as the Templar Stables. They made that their headquarters, where they oversaw this massive war. And some see this as a sacred site for different reasons than those who read the Quran or read the Bible and have a more naive notion that these occultists don't agree with. But they think of Solomon's Temple as a sacred thing too, but they see it as a center of global human sacrifice, where the ancient mystery cults had made their sort of stand, where people like Solomon from the Testament of Solomon, a medieval grimoire essentially, is recounted as being the guy who built the temple with demons that serviced him because of a special ring that had a certain symbol on it that gave him power over demon hordes.
Hold on a second, Matt.
Yeah.
What's happened? We're not talking about Abrahamic traditions here, are we?
Oh, we're not. We're talking about something else.
You led me into the occult. You tricked me, Matt. I didn't even know. It's like, whoa! And there I was thinking about Greater Israel.
Yeah, man. Well, that's what you got to look at, because people like Charles Warren, the head of international, Freemasonry with King Edward VII, who was setting the Palestine Expedition Fund in 1862 when at exploring and excavating Solomon's Temple. That's what they were obsessing about. They were reading the Testament of Solomon. They were of the belief that this is the zone where massive, human sacrifice to Baal, to Moloch was taking place at this temple that they believe should be reconstructed to usher in this new age of Horus, as some have called.
So Netanyahu and Trump, this is what they want? They're occult?
I don't know if they understand what this is, but it does seem to me, I do know that this is in play, and it does look like, whether they know it or not, they're serving as instruments advancing that thing. I'd like to think that they don't know that. I'd like to think they don't understand that.
Okay, a little bit like, here's a parallel, right? Perhaps a parallel. Teachers don't understand or get the harm that they're doing to children through schooling. People become teachers because through the best intentions whatsoever, but really destroying a child's spirit and its curiosity.
Yeah.
Advice that I have. Right? Okay.
That being said, there is a video that people could watch of Rabbi Schneerson, the head of the Chabad Lubavitch, chastising Benjamin Netanyahu in 1990, which they can go on Google and see Benjamin Netanyahu getting chastised by Rabbi Schneerson, the head Rebbe from this Kabbalistic sort of this grouping that has a lot of influence somehow, where the Rebbe is telling Benjamin Netanyahu, you're not moving fast enough to usher in the Messiah. You need to work harder. And he's like a chastised schoolboy apologizing, saying, I will work harder at doing this. And in the minds of some of these end timers, they believe that human beings can do certain things, explode certain things, build certain temples that will, like almost like an occult ritual, invoke the so-called prophecies that their various holy books have been holding on to, including the return of the Messiah, if you're a Christian Zionist, premillennial dispensationalist, or just bring the Messiah in the first time.
Who's the Messiah for the Jews?
We don't know yet. It's a mysterious thing.
I think for Christians and the Muslims, it's Jesus, I think. But for the Jews, who is it?
I don't know if it's been identified yet. It's like in the Islamic world too, and you got the 12ers that are waiting for the Al-Mahdi to make a comeback. I don't know who specifically, if they've identified anybody. I know that I've got some hypotheses about some contenders for who they think it is, but I don't know. I have no idea.
And how is this any different to, say, native peoples doing some sort of ritual to invoke and give rise to a certain spirit? So a certain spirit arises, and they want this particular ceremony, and they say, okay, if we have this particular ceremony,
Yeah,
then
we
this
kill the red heifers.
deity,
We kill the red cows at a certain day under a certain full moon, and
then
yeah,
this deity will arise.
yeah.
It,
I know you kind of glitch out, right? Well, you might actually when you speak to Cynthia, you might want to schedule one of your chats about her book on the ghost dance religion of the natives that the
oh,
Jesuits and Freemasons manipulated.
oh my God,
Because
Matt. Oh, Matt.
it's a really good book. And she goes through. It's called the Shaping of a World Religion. I'm looking on my bookshelf to see if I've got it there.
Okay,
It's somewhere.
for people who
Uh,
don't know, Cynthia Chung, if I pronounce her
yeah.
name right, she is your wife.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to be recording with her in a couple of days' time about the work that she does. So please
Mm.
subscribe, comment, like, and then I imagine, let us know in the comments because Cynthia's like Matt, I think. Never spoken to her yet, but I imagine she'll be like Matt. What is a breakfast morning conversation between Matt and Cynthia like? That'd be quite interesting. What if I got them both on together? My brain would melt, I think.
Maybe we'll set up like some sort of like a healthy intellectual OnlyFans where people could like tune in at the breakfast table. Just
That's right. OnlyFans for intellectuals. Okay. Now back to, let's get out of that chamber, out of the world of occultists, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Because the other thing is, as a lot of the other stuff that Trump has done has been consistent with restoring the American system of political economy and undermining the City of London, like getting rid of LIBOR, appointing Jay Powell, getting rid of LIBOR and replacing it with SOFR, weakening the United Nations and World Health Organization, tackling those globalist entities. The two of my guests told me, Harley Schlanger plus also PD Loughton did a video together with them, and they told me that what Trump was doing in Rwanda was attacking MS-33, British proxies that keep the conflict going in Rwanda, Congo. And then when he negotiated that treaty between Rwanda and Congo, thus allowing those countries hopefully to be peaceful sovereign nations and then develop themselves instead of constantly fighting, making it easier for the British and the French to extract resources from there. Then the taking on the drug cartel through the extraction of Maduro, and then also with the assassination of that cartel leader in Mexico, giving intelligence to the Mexican government. And then also he's now having the Shield of America meeting. I don't know much about it, but promoting all the tariffs, all these policies. And then he talks about McKinley and then closing the borders. So all those sorts of policies that are doing everywhere that seem like he's out to get the United States sovereign and independent and free from the control of the British.
There's definitely a massive change in world systems underway. That's for sure. And there are parallels to the American system that you've correctly observed. And I'm a big fan of undermining any of these globalist institutions. So those are things that are good. Now, I've got my grievances, though, my critiques about. Well, I've said I've got my critiques.
Critiques,
about,
yes.
Yeah, what is this new thing that some are calling the American system that has been applied, since I think that has a lot of similarities, though the name McKinley and Lincoln, but especially McKinley that Trump has invoked quite a bit, gives me a lot of inspiration and hope. I've done a lot of work on McKinley and his tariffs, how he did them. But at the same measure, there's also a celebration of Teddy Roosevelt, who came in over the dead body of McKinley, which is also present and also used tariffs that in a different way from McKinley. Now, McKinley, Cynthia actually produced a very good essay going through McKinley's understanding of a protective tariff versus a revenue tariff, a protective tariff being an authentic American system tariff designed with the intention of building up vital industry and powers of the nation to support itself and be more sovereign, not at the expense of other nations, though. It's always at the idea that you can help yourself by helping others, and helping others helps yourself in a reciprocal fashion, versus a revenue tariff, which is a more mathematical idea of applying tariffs across the board without an intention for building specific great projects that are going to bring out the best of your society, the way the New Deal did, or the Transcontinental Railway did, or the JFK programs for water projects were very concrete and specific, or today's Belt and Road Initiative. It's a very specific set of visionary ideas that give that help you organize how you apply your various tariffs on different industries in varying ways that you negotiate bilaterally. So two different things. The problem, my big critique right now, is it appears that what's being applied is a revenue tariff concept. It's not the protective tariff of McKinley. It's a revenue tariff that Teddy Roosevelt was doing and that others had failed to differentiate.
Right.
The other thing is it's happening at the expense of other nations. So, like, for example, in Japan, or in like especially Japan, South Korea, where deals were made with the United States, you're creating a condition where Japan has to do whatever, $600 billion commitment to invest in U.S. industries. India has a similar expectation. South Korea, I think it's $350 billion. But what's happening is it's hurting their economies. It's like they're literally no longer able to invest in the things that they were otherwise going to invest in, while at the same time opening up for free trade on things like GMO modified U.S. rice and corn that normally they would have been protecting because they had much better protections on food quality there than we do in the West, where Monsanto's been running the show, which is now flooding in, destroying their farmers and crippling their economy, while at the same time they're moving a lot of their industrial, their iron works into the U.S., but at the expense of not having that investment into Japan, which they formerly had wanted. So you're hurting them. Again, Cynthia's essay goes in depth into a lot of statistics demonstrating that we're actually hurting, that the foreign suppliers are not eating the tariffs. It is being passed on with the increased inflationary prices that we're seeing across the board inside of the United States. So consumers are actually eating more of the tariffs than we'd like to admit. And it's not really that force. It's not, they haven't done what the American system calls for yet. It's just doesn't seem to have that. I mean, the shield of the Americas seems to be principally geopolitically motivated to start figuring out how to carve out China from influencing the economies of Latin America, more so than actually developing a strong strategy. The crackdown on narco terrorists, I support that. That seems to be pretty good. But at the same time, I've read Aldous Huxley. I've read his Brave New World. I've read his The Island, his Doors of Perception. I know his role in shaping MK Ultra, and I know based on his work that the overarching ideal drug program for Soma, a Soma-based society, involves more psilocybins and psychedelics and ecstasy and LSD than it does for the old cocaine, the old heroin, and other things that are not part of his Brave New World, which RFK is pushing on pretty fast for this massive psychedelic drug legalization revolution that's been moving forward with Maha. I just produced an article for UK Column actually yesterday, going through this whole program. So I do see that as potentially, it's good to take down drug cartels that we created and that we've been managing for decades and decades. But is it being done with a thoroughly honest reason, or is there another motive in play? My concern is that there's another motive in play, and that these are variables that have too much agency. They're too uncontrollable if you want to get a more, integrated policy, like thought to action policy for the Americas as a whole, to kick out China and to consolidate power over some sort of like AI run feudal technocracy. That might have to be canceled in favor of something more centralized. So there is that. I don't want to I'm sorry that I'm blackpilling some people out there who might be listening. I just like looking at the variables and I'm trying not to ignore anything,
No, Matt, it's smart to do that. It's smart to do that. I've changed my position on many, many things in the light of new information, including where I've worked in in a situation where a fair number of the professionals are convinced, no, it's the man who's the perpetrator of domestic abuse because of this, because of this, because of this. And then I start digging in, looking at all these variables from different angles, and then, oh no, it's the mum. She's really smart here, really manipulative. In that instance, she wasn't very happy with me.
I can see that. I'm sure.
But we got to do that. It's like how I went from being interested, I'm going to move to a nice part of London where there are good schools, to actually looking at digging into home education, deciding to do that, or becoming high fat, low carb. All the time there's new information that we're being presented, and it's important, I think, to be able to pass that information and keep ourselves fresh and open to new ideas, because the reality is, Matt, you and I don't know. We're just speculating. And all credit to Tom Luongo. I have a lot of respect for him and Susan Cookinder and all the others. They're also speculating too. All we can do, right? All we can do. But thank you so much. Thank you, Matt. It's been an absolute treat. I look forward to a conversation with Cynthia very soon. And everybody, go on, let us know, what do you think is going on? Or actually, give us a really, really novel, absurd explanation, a few sentences of what's really going on. Maybe you take some psilocybin before you write that. This is Richard signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.